Here we go. So welcome everyone. Welcome to All Things Energy. So very excited to have this conversation today. We're talking about giants, the secrets of giants, and we're really excited because we have Adrian Collins that is here and he knows so much. I've had some great conversations with him and he knows so much about giants. So yes, and of course, welcome my co-host Heather, and go ahead, Heather.
Yes, hi, welcome everyone. This is so fascinating. Adrian Brooks Collins is the writer of this amazing book that I've read just a little bit about so far, and it's called Jamila and the Giants. So welcome, Adrian. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and exciting to talk about one of my favorite topics, one of our favorite topics. Thank you.
Yes, that's how we well, I know you came for a reading one time, but then we ended up getting on the topic of giants. And I think the reason it started was because I told you this story from when I was a little girl and we went to the Grand Canyon. And it was such an amazing experience. And I was standing at the railing with my grandmother, and I have this ability to kind of see within time and space. And all of a sudden, I'm looking around and I'm looking at this vast Grand Canyon, and it's really amazing. And I look at my grandmother and I said, Granny, why did the giants dig this hole? And she looked at me like I had 10 heads. Like she was like, no, no, Dana, the river made it. There's orbs everywhere flying around me. And yeah, so this is what it was. And I was like, I could distinctly see that there was some really tall people that looked like, if I could interpret it now, fracking the Grand Canyon. And I wonder if that's not where all the gold and silver came from.
Well, when you shared that insight with me, Dana, that was fascinating. And it was interesting because I am putting together a sequel to Jamila and the Giants, and she does a tour of the United States, excuse me. And one of the visits that she makes is to the Grand Canyon. And the reason I incorporated the Grand Canyon was because of the mysterious caves that had been found there at the turn of the 19th century, and that they found tombs and they found Egyptian artifacts, and it's now an inaccessible area. And when you told me that you had seen these giants as a 12-year-old girl, I was stunned because in the oratory record of Native Americans, they talk about the spirits of giants that are throughout the Midwest and Colorado and elsewhere that remain there after having been effectively ethnically cleansed by the Native American Indians. So there is a long record. I would also posit that you were just seeing spirits as they were continuing to do their work that they had done before, as many spirits do.
It felt like I was looking at them doing their tasks, and there was a whole bunch of them, and they were all standing at the wall, and they were really, really big. And if I think back to that 12-year-old self, why didn't I question the fact that they were so huge? I was more curious of why they were digging this big hole. If I remember the experience, it was an interesting experience, but I stopped talking as soon as my grandmother looked at me and said, no, no, the river made it. And I was like, oh, and I'm thinking, no, that's not what happened here.
It's astounding to me how life's experiences, seeing you through your work in the Canadian program. Remind me of the title. Was it Paranormal Activity or something like that? It was.
Oh, yes, I did know. My Paranormal Nightmare.
My Paranormal Nightmare. Thank you. I saw you there instantly, and I swear 3 seconds into the frame, I thought I need to talk to her. and I searched you on Facebook, and then we set up an appointment and we had the consultation. And it was then that you said, oh yes, I saw the giants as a child. And I'm getting chills now retelling this, because there again is this direct connection to information in this process of telling more about the giants. I couldn't believe the synchronicity. So when you shared that, I was just blown away.
We had a great conversation that day.
Yeah, we truly did.
Very much so. So interesting. So I was looking into it. You sent me a bunch of links. I know you're doing a lot of research when it comes to the Giants.
Yeah.
And I know you have a documentary coming up. So you want to give a little bit of an explanation, or are we going to save it for a secret?
Well, I would roll it back to how this story, Jamila and the Giants, came about. Do you think that's a good time to introduce it?
That's great. Yes.
So I was just scrolling through YouTube in 2017, and I came upon this lecture by Jim Vieira, which was an hour long, entitled Mysterious Stone Chambers and Giants of North America. And when I saw giants and North America in the same sentence, I always thought giants were elsewhere in the world, but never in North America, you know? So I watched the hour-long lecture where he had initially discovered animal effigies in the glaciated panels of the Michigan State Park when he was hiking with his brother. That is to say, he recognized turtles and snakes that had been assembled by massive boulders in the glacial erratic, which is the banks of where a glacier had traveled through in eons ago. And they had then created these artistic effigies of these animals. So he asked the park rangers, how did these come about? He said, oh, the Native Americans did that. But he knew intuitively that Native Americans are nomadic, and they don't build permanent, effigies or structures of any kind. And so shortly thereafter, he found the dolmens, the cantilevered massive boulder dwellings that were in fields in the region. And he asked again where these boulder dwellings came from. And they said, oh, yeah, the Indians used to reside in those, and they've left them behind. And yet again, he knew, no, they're nomadic travelers. So he went inside and looked in the roof of them and saw that it was a complex architectural construction of a sophisticated capability. And he himself, being a stonemason, knew there was more to that story. And he researched documentation, journals from the turn of the century, and discovered that, in fact, the bones of giants had been found in these dolmens, and that their skulls would fit over the head of an average man, and they had 64 teeth. They had double rows of teeth, top and bottom, bicuspids like our own. They weren't shark teeth, they were humanoid teeth. So I found it absolutely fascinating that here in North America there was 300 found in one pod race of sophisticated giants. And by sophisticated, I mean they had woven cloth, which takes machinery. This is 12,000 years ago. They had beaded pearls, which they harvested. And even now, drilling a hole through a pearl is a complex process. They adorned their clothing with them. They had copper metallurgy. They had breastplates and swords and amulets and crowns made of copper. They had stone tablets with written language on them. And last but not least, they had melted surface stone in rings. And you can't melt stone with conventional earth fire. So it is presumed that they had UFOs, because there's these massive rings around their sites of melted stone where some kind of machinery had landed. So I took this all in, astounded, and shortly thereafter I had dinner with my stepbrother, who's a dear supportive friend, and I was sort of covertly telling him about this lecture that I had seen, which became a banned TED Talk. They said, you can't disseminate this information because you're not a scientist. He said, I'm a stonemason, and this is what I discovered. And so as I was telling my stepbrother this, I didn't want his girlfriend to hear what I was saying, because I thought she would think I was nuts, because here I am in my 50s talking about giants in North America. And she leaned in. I
can relate.
Right. Say again.
I can relate.
Yeah. Right. Yes. And she leaned in and said, oh, with the double rows of teeth? And I was stunned. I said, you know about these giants? And she said, well, sure. The skeleton of one was on my grandparents' farm in Ohio. I saw it when I was a little girl. It had double rows of teeth. It was inside a boulder dwelling, and the government came in and took it away, and we never saw it again. Yeah. So I had my entire story. I had an eyewitness in my extended family. She had seen the double rows of teeth. The skeleton was 8.5 feet tall, and the government took it away without permission. The whole story unveiled itself before me in one conversation.
And then you get to see a little article in a paper somewhere of, look at what was found. That's 10 pages in the newspaper.
Right. And they played those down. They said they were
Mhm.
exaggerating the dimensions to sell newspapers, you know. The coup de grace, though, in all of this is this 400-page book, Giants on Record, by Jim Vieira, the lecturer. And in here, he has photographs of Smithsonian archaeological field journal notes of the same dimensions. Double rows of teeth, 9 feet tall, 12 feet tall, skulls fit over the head of an average man. And then they boxed them up and carted them off and never, ever exhibited them, you know. So that's why I wrote in Jamila and the Giants a direct confrontation to the Smithsonian, because I create this fictional battle where they criticize Jamila and say you're lying. This is, you know, child's play. There's no such record, and I use their actual archaeological field notes in my argument, saying, well, we do have these notes that you wrote in the discovery thereof.
Love it.
Thank
Wow.
you. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank you. So shall I continue?
Well, I think I kind of wanted to ask you, where would he have gotten the pictures from the Smithsonian? Like, how did he have access to this?
They published, the Smithsonian Institute published every year from their conception, their activities and their logs of their research and their annual profiles of the Smithsonian's actions, as you would for any other formal institution. And they're accessible, they're publicly accessible. And so he got those stacks and opened them up, and there was the information just laid out, you know, day by day journals.
So why do you think they're trying to, you know, dismiss or debunk or suppress this information? What do you think this is about?
One of the theories that Jim Vieira posits is that Ehrlicher, Ehrlecker, was one of the early directors of the Smithsonian Institute, and he happened to be a eugenicist. And in a nutshell, that means that the white Caucasian male cranium is the superior species on the planet. So when he was presented with a larger skull and extensive other, you know, sophisticated materials, he simply dismissed it, like that it cannot be that there is a more advanced race than Caucasian males in the 19th century, you know. So that's one theory. The other theory is that our fundamental roots of America want us to adhere to the status quo, you know, of creationism, which is absurdist. You may quote me. Although, having said that, I am convinced that we are some sort of primate alien hybrid. We're not from this planet. All humans are some other concoction. I
somehow merged with something else, and yeah, absolutely. So do you think it has something to do with the Nephilim? I mean, we've all heard that word, the Nephilim. Do you think there's some sort of correlation?
I do think, well, it's funny that as that story, as you know, is that there was these giants that came down. They were effectively angels, and they came to Earth, and they found humans attractive, and then they bred with them and created these intermediate species, and then God smited them with 400 years of floods or whatever the duration was. I think that there are bits and pieces that are true. In other words, I think giants existed. But they
still do. They're still really tall people with giantism. So that's still part of it.
I misspoke. I should say, I think giants existed and continue to exist to this day.
Right, yes.
There are documented sightings, and by documented, I mean the eyewitness went to the authorities and said, look, this is what happened. Documented sightings of giants in giant spaceships leaving large bodies of water and with smaller aliens on board these massive ships. And I think that's basically what happened 12,000 years ago. So, so that is to say the Nephilim may have been reinterpreted or retold. We're talking 12,000 years, so there's many iterations of a story as these fallen angels or these giants or this interbreeding and this kind of stuff. But in the Sumerian text, in the tablets in Mesopotamia, they talk about direct communication with alien beings that came down and said, okay, you're going to build the buildings this way, and you're going to speak this language. And oh, by the way, we need to enslave you because we need your gold to project into our atmosphere because we're having problems with our solar system. It's burning our citizens, So there's a long history of alien engagement. Why would the Mesopotamians 6,000 years ago write that in their text if something to that effect didn't happen?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's also a story in the Bible too, isn't there? Do you recall that story at all?
I believe that's
David and Goliath.
I believe that's what Dana was mentioning. That is the origin story that is.
Okay. Yeah. So there you go. It's in
yeah.
that print.
I don't even know what to ask. I'm like, okay, I want to know about this and I want to know about this because I just, there's a video out there now of maybe the 1920s, and there's this really enormous guy parading through town with a bunch of very short people. Do you recall what I'm talking about? I can't remember the name of it.
I do. I saw that clip. That took place in China, actually. And the giant is Russian, which is interesting. He was a visiting anomaly. But I believe that that's real footage of a giant person because there was massive people into the late 19th century. There was explorers who went out and found indigenous tribes, and some of them were giants, and they would describe these massive human beings, But that is, fortunately, I believe, an actual filmic, representation of the scale and the massive size of that giant. Yeah, that's a startling
video. I'll see if I can find it. I'll put it in the comments and see if we can all kind of try and make sense of this. Well, now I've lost track again. So, I find that when I ran across another story too, where the military was going into Afghanistan and they ended up being ambushed. And, there's these military personnel who are just telling their story. And the story is authentic. It rings true. It feels true. And it's the giants of Afghanistan. And this is recent. This is like in the last 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, that was actually Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2002, and the information was released in 2016. And the story was that during the operation, whatever the title of our infiltration of Afghanistan was called, we were sending out small units of Marines to neutralize I can't think of the name of the opposing party. Anyway, they were cells that were hotspots that were against the United military occupation in Afghanistan. And one party of 12 Marines went out, and they were supposed to send up a satellite notification of their location every day at noon. And the following day at noon, that notification didn't come in. And so the general said, we'll give it one more day, and if we don't hear on the day, we'll send out a follow-up unit. And on the second day, they did not get the notification, and they sent out a second unit of 12 Marines to the last location of the known earlier scouts. And when the scouts reached the location, they found dismembered and partially eaten Marines on the ground. And while they were examining the nature of the attack, they were set upon by a 12-foot giant that came out of a massive cave with a 9-foot sword, a metal sword. And he actually harpooned one of the Marines and lifted him up into the air. And they couldn't believe what they were seeing. There was no training, no calculation, no preparation for giants.
They were just told to aim high.
Yeah, their leaders said, shoot him in the head, shoot him in the head, shoot him in the head.
Exactly.
Thing. And then they were making the connection. Oh, this is what this is what slaughtered these men and was eating these men. And so they shot it in the head and blew off half of its head, and it collapsed on the ground. And they said it was a stench like they'd never smelled before. And then they called headquarters and they said, well, we know why we didn't hear from the first Marines. And they went out there with a huge plane and put this giant on a pallet, threw a net over it, and put it into this plane and flew it to Ohio, which is
what's in Ohio?
Yeah, that's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which also has alien spaceships in it. That's on record. You can look up the employee who worked at Wright-Patterson and says there's spaceships on that base. But they flew this Kandahar, Afghanistan giant to Ohio, and they said this did not happen. You did not see this. And then shortly thereafter, the word leaked out. Once these men were released from the military, they began to talk about it. And then this gentleman, whose name escapes me, went in and conducted this documentary where he interviewed the 12 men who were there. And they said at one point, they asked the various tribes in the region what they knew about this history of giants. And they said, oh, they've always been out there. We occasionally have to make contributions to them, meaning they had to sacrifice human beings to these cannibalistic giants. Just shocking, But they accepted it as part of their culture that you don't go too far out in the mountains because there's giants living in the caves, which means that there was a lineage. It was, this giant had to have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. I mean, can you imagine the history that's out there?
And they're still breeding then, obviously, and they're still kind of putting together. And apparently they can speak Hebrew and they can speak English. And apparently they have this consciousness about them as well. They're not just, they don't have smarts and abilities and what have you. They're actually conscious beings. And we can understand them.
Yeah, it's absolutely astounding. I mean, it's like a whole new chapter to me in our world history,
Right.
I want to know these histories. That's the thing that bothers me most about the history that's written today, is that this is true history to me psychically. I feel like it's spiritually. I feel like it's something that resonates with me. I feel like you can tell the difference between truth and non-truth, and this resonates as truth.
Yeah, absolutely. You can fortunately, as sentient beings, we can sense down in that, yes, this is truth. This occurred, and Stonehenge, I wanted to mention, is equated with giants. They finally admitted that there's graves of giants in the vicinity, and the structural feat that is Stonehenge and equal structures in the area could have only been mastered by giants who could physically place those multi-ton stones up there.
And what do you suspect the purposes of Stonehenge?
On a guess, I would say that it would have to do with planetary communication, that is to say, ceremonial alignment with one's purpose on Earth. Perhaps it was a way to transmit information to other realms. I think we've yet to fully know that, obviously.
So it's interesting. I'm always about going to high vibrational frequencies where, good things can be felt and so on and so forth. I've never, ever wanted to go to Stonehenge.
Oh, yeah. Honor that.
I've been there
Okay.
to Stonehenge, and I did feel a certain type of energy there. But at the time that I was there, I think I was about 16 years old. So I wasn't fully understanding what these energies were,
Sure.
and especially at various places that I went to England. I just thought that it was just teenage hormones type of thing.
Right.
But I do recall these stones were huge, just
Yeah.
huge. And the circular, like everything about it, that it was for a much bigger, grander purpose than what we've been told or informed about.
Absolutely. And in my research for the history of giants, I found that there's a region of Siberia where there's these megalithic structures, these massive multi-ton stone dwellings and spheres, stone spheres. They had some sort of technology to create stone spears. And we had them right here in California. There was a railroad, I think it was for the Red Line, being cut out to Santa Monica in like 1912. And they came upon about 112 spheres, stone spheres.
I've seen them.
Yeah, they're astounding. And no one knows what they're for. No one knows how they're manufactured, and their precision. They're globes,
Well, I think this can go down such a rabbit hole if we unpack it, because even if you think about some of those mountains that are in the desert or in Arizona or what have you, and they're flat topped, but if you look at them, they look like a tree stump that was cut. But
Right.
that tree would have been like 60 kilometers tall.
Yeah, that speaks to the scale of giant things,
Mhm.
and an ancient time when it's mind bending, the sort of scale that represents.
But I think it all kind of comes together in some way, Yeah, I've been to the Petrified Forest. I've seen those mountains. And I remember looking at it thinking, that looks like a tree stump that was cut or something. And my brain would register it, but then I'd be thinking, oh, no, it's just a rock. But then the older you get, you're like, oh, well, doesn't wood turn into rock in any case in some way, petrified?
Yeah, good point. And, being of energy as we all are and all things are, it can still be resonating at a frequency of what it was. I mean, as the spirits of these giants are still floating around, they held space and they held some sort of record, and there's nothing really to stop them from continuing to do that. It's fascinating that they're still out there. I wanted to point out a couple of inspirations for my pictures for the children's book. This, I don't know if you can see these giants in the background. They're silhouettes, and those were inspired by a photograph taken from a Brownie camera in the early 20s at a logging camp. And there was just two children sitting on a log, as you would do. And then off to their left is the silhouette of this giant, this humanoid giant who just happened to be sitting on the log. And you can tell they have no idea that it's there. But there's their energy frequency still out there living,
Well, I think they're still out there. As far as I'm concerned, I think that has something to do, or maybe there's a sort of race of Bigfoot. I think somehow they're connected with it in some way as well.
I agree. I think Bigfoot is a spin-off from some sort of experimental or early, primate species. And as Dr. Lloyd, the late Dr. Lloyd Pyle said, they hang around the outskirts because man is so violent. Conventional man is so aggressive and so dangerous that they don't want any part of it. That's why they're always in these, Adirondack type, areas of isolation, because they just don't want to be victimized by this aggressive human that we are.
Because if you ever hear about the stories, the Bigfoot always just seems like they're scaring the people away to make them run away. That's what he kind of does. He makes a lot of noise and bangs on things, and people just like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, there was a whole town in Alaska that was abandoned because of some beast in the woods that would just come out and scare them. They left the whole town. It was a mining town, and they said, we can't deal with this anymore.
Oh, well, no doubt. I would be gone too. I gotta say, I would have to admit, I'd be gone. That would be scary. So that brings me to the question: if there are Nephilim giants, is there good giants and bad giants? Good Nephilim, bad Nephilim? Do you think that there's that polarity there as well?
Well, the Indians, Native Americans, are credited with, as I mentioned, killing the giants. And I think they probably did this with poison arrows. And it's a question of whether or not it was a bit access to resources, like fighting over food, or if in fact, as is averred in many historical texts, that they were cannibalistic, and or that they were simply violent. They were confrontational, and that we couldn't coexist with them. So the question's up in the air. I'm sure as there's the range of personalities that we have, there would be the range of personalities that giants have,
I feel like that. I feel like there's some good ones out there and maybe not so good ones.
Yeah. But to have been as advanced as they were, that obviously takes some sort of developed cohesion, to create a civilization. They had 50-acre octagons and 30-acre circles, these earthen berm land patterns that I visited in Newark, Ohio, that are astonishing precision and complexity, for whatever purposes that they required. I believe was coming and going from our planet.
So I think they fall in line with the Book of Enoch as well. That part of the Bible, the Book of Enoch. It's an interesting read.
Okay, I'm not familiar. I'm not. I was generation non-religious, so I don't have a biblical foundation.
And you know what? I've just recently, over the past few years, been very interested in the writings because it's actually just very inspiring, really, when you're reading it. So my friend had introduced the Book of Enoch to me, and there is definitely talk of giants in that part of the Bible.
That's a great contribution then. Yes.
Absolutely. Good. Wow.
And I see a picture in the back, Adrian, that just over your right shoulder, that you have is that of a giant?
Yeah, that is an original piece that I discovered in my giant search. And the scale is so beautiful, from the children playing on the beach to the actual giant. And the giant is massive. He's probably 30 feet tall in that image. But he's got this complex weaponry or sort of alien suit on. I don't know if I should try to bring it closer, but there is I just thought it spoke to what was very likely. I'll attempt to bring it over there. What was very likely the capability of the aliens at that time. So you can see it's quite a. Can you see that?
If you
Lower the camera a bit.
Lower it.
Yeah.
That work?
More.
A little bit more.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah.
Let me
There we go.
Oh my goodness. Yes, that's huge.
Yeah.
And
What a great picture.
And when was that made?
I want to say like 56.
Wow.
Yeah, the artist, 1952. The artist is, oh my goodness, Joshua. And it looks like Kugliengling. I'm sure that I ruined that name. But the minute I saw that, I thought, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Some sort of massive, sophisticated, advanced beings. Right. So I think I would argue that it's possible that being presented itself to him as an artist, and said, this is what we look like.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there is different races. I think there's some that are 8 feet tall. I think there are some that are 9 feet tall. I think there's some that are 30, 40. The ones that I saw and remember seeing were really big, and there was tons of them.
Yeah. There's a scale of giants on the web, and they have them 18 to 36 feet tall. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard for us to wrap our minds around them, but it's just an entirely different scale than we're used to. We are, in fact, small, very small beings compared to them,
That's amazing.
And what about the graveyards that were found? There's hundreds of graveyards that have been found with giant skeletons in them.
Yeah, and they were elaborately, decorated graves with contributing plates of metal with histories on them, and swords and precious gems, and complex inlaid metal, crowns and whatnot. I mean, it's just a massive store of information that we, unfortunately, in our blind, industrial development, in our westward migration, have succumbed to this cover up. And it's time to admit that it's far more real and far more genuine than we allow ourselves to believe, which is why I bring this argument forward in the book. Jamila is visited by the spirits of these giants during an out-of-body experience. She has a swimming mishap, and no one believes her. They said, "Oh, that's you just had a bad dream. There's no such thing as giants." and she puts her foot down and fights this battle to prove that there was this history there. And lo and behold, she proves that to be true.
Wonderful.
And that's what led to the motion picture contract that I got. I got a $5 million movie contract. So I'm excited to state that it's going to be coming out, I think, about 3 years from now, once I get some other projects in line.
Wow.
Can I be like at the showing or whatever they do first when you release it? Can I be at the premiere? Is that what it's called?
Yes, we will fly you in, or I'll fly
Okay.
you.
That would just, I mean, wow.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and it's meant to be. I mean, I got the movie deal before the book was published. It's part of the process.
That's amazing.
And so if I can just go back, Adrian, a bit. So when you went to the course or heard Jim Vieira, right? He was the one that spoke, and that's what really started all of this journey for you, right? And you said that wasn't too long ago, or what part of your life?
Right, that was in 2017 that I stumbled upon that lecture.
Yes,
and
yes.
Didn't expect it to be much of anything, and yet it was so well researched, and I sent Dana the link. You can see it for yourself. It has
I did.
a complex, gathering of historical fact from many different sources that substantiate his position. And the TED, the Technology, Education, and Design format kicked him out. They banned that talk, as I probably said, that they said, "You're not a scientist." And he said, I never said I was a scientist. I'm a stonemason. And this is what I discovered in my research, that these species existed, and here's the bones, and here's the dimensions, and here's the newspaper articles. But yeah, I thought that this feels right, as you felt, Dana. There's an authenticity to this. And then, as I said, when my sister-in-law was an eyewitness, it just sealed the deal.
But that's where I was going. Sorry, Dana, but that's where I was going with this, Adrian, is you have felt you're on a different journey in since you've been a part of that course, that program, or that event that you attended. And so many other great things have been happening for you in your life.
Yeah, I started to think that because my films were not being, my screenplays were not being recognized, I thought maybe I had taken some missteps in life, and that I was sort of deluding myself as to what I could accomplish or what should happen. But that was sort of a counter story to myself, because at the same time, my deeper self thought, no, just persevere, hang in there. But fortunately, my attention was drawn to the word giants, and then when it was validated, it opened up this entirely new chapter, as you've said, of opportunity. And I flew to Ohio and did ground research, and saw that the likelihood, the actual track record of these giants was extensive. It was global, and contributed to many anomalous structures around the world. Even in China and Korea, they have these dolmens, these stone structures. And there's even Puma Punku, which is in Bolivia, which is in South America, where they have these megalithic structures of precision cut. They're like Art Deco, grid pattern, interlocking, multi-ton boulders.
They can't even put a piece of paper between.
Exactly.
Wow.
But yeah, it sort of presented to me a whole new level of awareness and connections and synergy in this enlightenment. Yeah, definitely opened a new foray into this next chapter of my life. And it's given me such validation in my purpose for even this podcast now. It's recognition to say, you did this, you saw these points, you connected these dots, you wrote this story, and it's very exciting.
And we connected for some reason, and that brought me back to, I mean, I've always had that affiliation with giants. I've always looked at it, been very interested in it. And when all of the lockdowns started kind of happening, and I'm kind of hesitant to tell the story, but I think it's an important one. And as I was sitting there thinking, okay, what is it that I need to do? Where do I need to be? And I put it out to source and spirit and said, what's my role in this? And I hear out of the ethers, look for the giants at the White House. And I
Wow.
kind of went, what? And then they repeated, look for the giants at the White House. So I was like, okay, and didn't have any clue how it was all going to come about. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, 4 days later, I'm kind of looking at the White House, looking around, how it's built, who built it, the history of it, just because it was interesting. And then all of a sudden, I'm on the Twitter White House page, and I'm on the Twitter official White House cover photo. And it's an airplane with a bunch of people standing in front of it, with a really tall guy standing beside the airplane. That's the height of the engine. And there's about 50 or 60 people that are standing in front of him, taking pictures of him. Yeah. And the camera's pointing at them. They're all looking at them straight if you kind of expose it. And I was like, I found the giant at the White House. That's what it was. And I still don't have any answers to it. All I know is that, you know, I've sent it to a lot of people, but it didn't get a lot of traction. And I tell you, for like 2 years, I went in every other day to see if that was their official cover photo. And it was for 2 years. And you're sitting here going, so what is this? Who is this? What is this about? Yeah. It didn't change.
It'd be interesting to find out the origin of that photograph and why there isn't more information around something so unusual as an actual giant person, you know?
Standing beside Air Force One.
Yeah. I would. Yeah.
Very strange.
Hopefully there's some, you know, explanation as to how that came about. I know in these giants that I've written are the Talague Giants, which is Talligewi, Talague. And there is unfortunately a slight mix-up in that online, when you look them up, you'll find these color photographs of people digging up giants. And the origin of those photographs was in fact a Photoshop training. The training was to train people working in Photoshop as to how to create images that look real. It wasn't meant to throw off the history at all. It was simply a training. And unfortunately, they got taken onto the web as fact. And they're not. And I know they're not. And the other giantologists know that they're not.
It's the man standing beside the skull, right?
Yeah. They're massive skulls. You know, they're like 9-foot skulls, which we haven't. Yeah. But I'm just pointing out that sometimes the scale of images and the creation of images can be deceiving. You know, and so you have to have corresponding information that obviously, but you know how to do research. I mean, I'm not telling you anything.
I honestly, there isn't anything that I can find on it. I know that picture is important, but there's nothing. And actually it was funny because I posted it under one of Trump's tweets on Getter or something. I just put the picture up and I said, hey, is there anything that this gentleman can help us with? And it just went on the post as a little picture. And then I went back into it the next day and it was this huge on the feed, like it was just blown up, but nobody commented on it. Nobody said anything, but there's something significant about it one way or another. I just don't know what it is. And I haven't gotten rid of it. I've kept them on file. I know something's going to come about. I just don't know exactly how it's going to come about. I just know it's important.
Yeah, I was intrigued by what you showed me, and I did research on it as well, and I wasn't able to come up with any additional information. So
me neither.
It is yet to be revealed.
Well, you know what? We'll go live when that happens. How does that sound?
It sounds great. Yeah.
Good. Well, I think, you know what, we could probably wrap it up now. And I think we should, though, continue this conversation. Are you willing to come back and do another session with us at some point?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're only on the threshold of this. It's going to be a trilogy. This is Jamila and the Giants. The next book is going to incorporate your experience of witnessing the giants in the Grand Canyon. And then they're going to go to Peru to see the Olmecs. And then they're going to go on to Ecuador to see the lost city of the giants, which was discovered in 2012. And basically, I'm just continuing to bring forth these bits of information that are, disparate in our history and assemble them with actual record that proves that there was this other level of existence, this other giant race. So yeah, we should definitely have more conversations about this development and the film development. And there's an Instagram by the same name. So I look forward to it.
Me too. Heather, do you have any closing statements?
Well, yes. And Adrian, I just must say that I see an incredible, truthful, honest, beautiful glow about you.
Thank you.
And I really, really am excited to hear so much more about the adventures that you're going on, and to help individuals learn more and understand more truths that we need to be exposed to.
Thank you. Very kind. That's very, very kind of you to say. I appreciate hearing that. And I'm grateful that this information has come to me and that I found a modality that I can, present it through. And just thank you. That touches my heart. Thank you for hearing it.
Well, it was sincerely given, that's for sure. Yes. Yeah. You're a lovely man. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very appreciative to have got to have this time to spend with you. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
if you're interested in buying his book, I did put his information at the bottom of the comments. So go ahead and reach out to him. I'm sure he'll be very welcoming to you.
Yes.
So
I'm going to buy a
I
book,
guess
for
like
sure.
and subscribe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. So until next time, it's been so great. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching All Things Energy. And until the next broadcast, we'll see you then. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. You too. Pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm sorry, Wendy. Sorry, Wendy.
Oh, so good.